Hey, Tigers, welcome to this week's module on team leadership. You're also covering complex adaptive leadership. I feel the two kind of go hand in hand because of the complexities that this theory is going to talk about, and also what's discussed in complex adaptive and how leadership is constantly on the move and constantly adjusting as our world is ever changing. Um, I this is kind of funny. So when I was getting my PhD in my leadership class, similar to this one, but wasn't sport focused, we each had to choose a theory to present on to the class. And this is actually a theory that I presented on. So you are getting an updated version of a presentation I gave to my peers back in 2011. So just a little fun fact. So let's get started. Team leadership. So why is it important to study this? One of the first questions I ask a lot of people when I'm working with teams is like, give me examples of teams you've been on since you're in your life, right? And they always go to their first little league team. Maybe some talk about being in a choir. Maybe they were in the band, but you have been on a team since you were born, right? Like your family is the first team um, that you've been a part of. And so I think a lot of how we approach teamwork and relationships and dynamics is really rooted in our home life, how we've been taught and raised. I think that's kind of an overlooked part of team leadership a little bit. Also, the use of teams within organizations is very common. It's not going anywhere. In fact, I think that we're seeing a shift in more of a team, and we'll talk about that later, a shared leadership responsibility. That helps us better understand the role of leadership. The leadership just in mainstream culture, not even in like research and literature, is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? So I think everyone is fascinated. Everyone's trying to learn how to lead themselves better, but also how to become a better leader for other people. So this helps us with that. Also, it helps us focus and understand team leadership capacity. And we've kind of talked about this, with stuff that's leadership that's performed by a single person or that is performed by a group of people. And what we're finding is that the organizations and the teams that can find a way to have a group of people share responsibility in leadership or are kind of starting to pull away from the ones that kind of old school, I'm the leader and vertical hierarchy kind of organizational structure. Also, to analyze and better recognize effective leadership, decision making, intervention skills, and problem solving. Y'all, seriously, if I could design a class, and I'm trying to make this happen, I would love to design a class from this program that focuses on these three skills: decision making, problem solving, and I'll just say critical thinking instead of intervention skills. That is leadership to me, the ability to make decisions confidently and I won't say it, and I'll say in a timely manner, right? Okay, because some of us are different thinkers and process oriented. So I think that's a big one. And then leadership is relationship driven, and ultimately a relationship is a team in itself. So you're talking about two people, that is a team. Some of the sports, sand volleyball team, doubles team, and tennis, right? Those are the first two that come to mind. Team communication and identity are ever evolving. I think that if we've learned anything in 2020, our world is changing, which I think, again, this is why this pairs so well with complex adaptive theory. Our team is changing. Our ways of communicating and our ability to communicate are changing. And it all is connected onto how we lead within a group of people. So that's why I think it's an important thing to study, and probably why I chose it back in 2011, right? So here we go. Leadership team theory. So just hitting the high marks, what is a team? I gave you the definition straight from Norhaus. I encourage you to maybe create your own version. And again, kind of the big thing that we talk about in this chapter is team leadership can happen one of two ways. It can happen from a very formal leader role, or it can happen from a shared team member structure. And so, but the team effectiveness, there's no question, hinges upon the leadership processes. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later in a more like contemporary way in some of the books that I've read and resources I'm going to give you. But we're definitely trending more towards this shared distributed leadership. We're definitely trending more towards like team leadership, not leader of the team, but the team being a leader of the team. And I think you hear people say that all the time, especially in sport, is like the great teams aren't coach led, they're player led, right? And so I think that's speaking to that as well. So I just read through this history. I think it's kind of an interesting thing to think about how maybe teams have evolved and where their research is focused and what it's found over decades. When I started thinking about this, I was I think of Bear Bryant, in the Alabama football dynasty, and I think that he led a very particular way in that era. I think of the factory workers and factory lines and how manufactured items were built. Those are kind of the first two things I think of. But I think of how we now the WeWork space, right? That obviously is maybe under a little bit of duress right now, but people breaking out of their own startups, right? And so I just think about how teams have changed, primarily in the workplace, but also I think you compare a coach like Bear Bryant to a Steve Kerr or Greg Popovich, and I think we see some evolution there as well. So Hill's model, three big things. All right, so this is kind of the big model of the chapter, and I think it's pretty cool. It's kind of a choose your own adventure in a little bit of a way, but again, three elements: leadership decisions, the leadership actions, and the team effectiveness, right, being the outcome. And I think what's really interesting, and this just takes me back to a little bit of a soapbox, is leadership decisions. It all comes down to your ability to make decisions. And so the biggest thing a lot of times where that coaches have to face is, do I do something about this, or do I kind of just let it ride? Do I need to monitor this? I don't want to overreact. And so knowing your team well enough to just make that decision right off the top, right? It's like, do I need to do something now? Do I need to wait? Do I need to have my assistants monitoring this? Do I need to have casual conversations about this right now? And I think that that's a really big deal. And then from there, obviously there's, two types of actions that Hill has identified: internally and externally. And within internally, is it more people oriented? Is it more task oriented? Are we doing something systematically wrong that we need to maybe change? Do we need to revamp our training? Is our policy out of date? Those types of things. Or are people just not motivated? Do we need to have off-campus retreat? What's going on there? And then the external leadership actions, do we need to take this outside of the organization and change some things up down there? But that ultimately is what comes down to team effectiveness. And I pulled this quote from Nordhaus, and it just, the leader's job is to monitor the team and then take whatever action is necessary to ensure team effectiveness. And I think what's interesting about this quote, and in some of the other theories that we've talked about, right? Some of the other theories are pretty singularly focused on the leader. I think what team leadership is talking about, this is ultimately about what's best for the team. And we're going to do an exercise a little bit later. I'm going to give it to you. You can choose if you want to do it or not. But you're going to have to really think about what that means. Like, what does it mean for a leader or a leadership team to put the team before maybe their own agenda or their own priorities? I think that's another really cool aspect of this theory and line of thinking. So strengths and not strengths, right? Serves as a guide for leaders, kind of like I said, so choose your own adventure, kind of walks you through this, holds your hand a little bit. It counts for changing roles of leaders and followers, leadership being just a function of someone. So maybe it's just like, think of it as a bullet point in your job description, right? It might not be your title, and can help in the selection of team members. Who are the people that you're constantly finding, stepping up, making the decisions? I think that that's something you think about as a coach or as an administrator, is like, who are your rising stars in a way? And then not strengths is not completely supported, tested, and it's a complex model. And I think the second bullet point is the most interesting one, right? Is it doesn't provide easy answers, and I part of me think that that's okay, because leadership isn't easy. Like, if it was easy, then I think it wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry, because everybody would be doing it really, really well. We wouldn't see all these leaders fall from grace. We wouldn't have consultants, right? And so, and then the other part is where do you start with training, which kind of takes me back to creating a course on decision-making, critical thinking, problem solving. So if anybody has any input on that, shoot me an email. I'd love to have a conversation or even a Zoom around that topic. So a few resources for you and just some food for thought. I'm always thinking about application for you guys. And so, today's team leadership, a couple of books that I've read that always come to mind when talking about this. Daniel Coyle's Culture Code, which if you've taken sports psych, We talk about that in a lot of depth. And so I encourage you to check that out. Tons of podcasts on there. And Pat Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which some of you may be really familiar with. It's very popular. And so a couple resources here. Coyle's talking about 3 steps when he talks about, teams that are the most successful, right? That's basically what he set out to find is the cultures that created the best producing teams. And what he found is that these teams create safety, they share vulnerability, and they establish purpose. And I think what's interesting is that purpose is last, right? And I think a lot of times when we think about this is that we have to create the mission and then get everybody behind it. And I think what Coyle finds is, no, you need to get everyone together, right? You need to create the safety, you need to create the vulnerability, you need to create a safe, nurturing space. And then after that's well established, get to the purpose and the mission. Lencioni's Dysfunctions of a Team, you can kind of work your way through these things, trust being at the base, which I don't think is a big surprise for anyone. If for those of you working with youth, I have used the movie Cool Runnings. Feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme. Come on out, it's bobsled time. I have used that as a vehicle for teaching the 5 dysfunctions of the team. I have resources on that. If you would like to discuss it more, let me know. But just kind of a fun way to get your kids engaged with the material. And then also Project Aristotle under Culture Code. That is a link to a video where Google did a pretty massive study on their teams, and it yielded similar results to what Daniel Coyle found. And so if you want to check that out, it's like a 3-minute video. Other things I thought of putting this together is, your social media influencers. I think that's a big, we have movements happening, right? Which I would classify those as team. I think about who do you follow on social media. Right now, the first person that comes to mind that I follow is Glennon Doyle, Maria Taylor. I would say Dan Levy, Schitt's Creek is someone. People who have influence. Andy Stanley is a pastor. But who are you following? What movements are you following? That's team leadership. And why are you following them? Because they are creating movements, right? And so I think that's something that it can be classified under team leadership. Student athletes on campuses, we're seeing that, I feel like every day right now, with them stepping up and leading, using their position of influence to create change. And then also what's happening in our world right now is virtual team leadership. And so how have you experienced maybe your leadership changing since being primarily on Zoom? I know for me, I've only ever taught online. I've never been in a classroom. I do get to be in locker rooms when I'm consulting, and that's very cool, but it's 2 very different experiences when you can see someone face to face, look them in the eye, you can give them a high five, you can give them a hug. It's very tangible in a physical space, but then when you're online, I know that I've had to learn to work extra hard at creating the personal connection that you would otherwise get in a classroom setting. So what are you learning about yourself as a leader in the spaces that we're in now versus where we were, 8 months ago? So just some food for thought there. I'm going to leave you with a few questions and tools. I do think that the team leader questionnaire is kind of worthwhile, and I read through it, and if it might not be something you use with your team, so to say, but I do think it gives you really good food for thought of evaluating yourself a little bit, which kind of connects over on the questions I ask is, with you being the team leader, how are you evaluating yourself? And I think it gives you pretty good prompts with that. After action reviews, huge from the military. After every mission, they ask what went well, what didn't, and what will we do differently next time. I think that's some good questions to ask yourself. And then an elevator speech of, what is your purpose? What is your mission? How are you going to go about executing that? And so I think these kind of overlap a little bit. So as a team leader, how do you create and maintain engagement, that buy-in piece? What is your response in moments of crisis? Like, how good are you in those hard moments? What is not just your response, but what is your action plan in those moments? I know for me, it's seeking wise counsel as one of the things. I know reflection, prayer, And also just going with your gut, which also means that you have to make sure you have a good gut. And so maintaining that along the way. And then what's it like to be on the other side of me? That last question is one of my favorite things. And I think that this is really kind of important as we shift more towards the shared leadership responsibilities within teams is you have to know each other really well, right? And so what is it like to work alongside me every day? I think is a good question for you to ask coworkers, assistant coaches, co-coaches, whoever you are sitting next to 6 feet away these days. So here's an activity for you. I'm posting the PDF on the module. And so it's Leadership Madness. And so I'm a basketball girl, and I'll tell you what, this is the same exact exercise I used with my class back in 2011, and I've continued to use it with teams. I have different versions of it depending on who I'm working with. So I gave y'all a group of leaders that we've got some range on there, but what I encourage you to do is sit down, and maybe you want to do this with your family or with your team even, and thinking about who leads a team well, based on the things we've talked about, right? Decision making, um, critical thinking, problem solving, building relationships. Who do we think is the best team leader on the grid? And you can go matchup by matchup, just like you would in bracketology in March. So that's what I have for you. I hope you've enjoyed this chat, this lecture, so to say, and I will talk to you guys soon. All right, go Tigers.